You're listening to episode 1035 of the Father Bills Podcast. Welcome back. Well, this week's episode is being offered by Deacon Brett Edmondson and is the homily entitled Bless Our Country, given on the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time, 2026.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Independence Day weekend to all of you. So I want to begin with a story about Army Major Nicholas Dockery. He's a recent Medal of Honor winner, which, as some of you know, is our nation's highest military award. I was reading his acceptance speech this week, and I was kind of inspired by it, so I thought I might share some of it with you this morning. So Major Dockery, he begins with actually an observation. He says, one of the distinctive things he's come to see about Americans is the way that we come together again and again in the face of disaster or tragedy or threat. And he says he first learned this lesson as a teenager in Kansas when a tornado tore through a small town not far from where he lived, leveling everything. Well, the next day he and his friends volunteered to go up there and help, and he said when he got there, what impressed him most was not the extent of the destruction, which was considerable, as you would guess, but it was the way that people from all over the state, and even from different parts of the country, kept showing up to help render aid and support. So here were these residents of a small town in the middle of nowhere who had lost everything. Truly a disaster. But what impressed them was it was a disaster that they did not have to face on their own. Neighbors, friends, family, and most of all, a wealth of strangers from all over showed up to help, to do what needed to be done. A few months later, he said that same lesson was reinforced when he and his classmates watched two airplanes crash into the New York skyline on 9/11. And then they watched firefighters and police officers race up the stairwells of the World Trade Center in order to save survivors, right up until the buildings came down on top of them. And in the wake of that, he said, the unity of a nation rallying together was almost palpable, and it inspired him to enlist in the Army in order to defend what he had just witnessed and was coming to love. Moments like this, he said, people like this is what I want to fight for. These are worth defending. And that's how a few years later, he found himself deployed to Afghanistan, a young Army officer. One day, his task force came under heavy fire, and his commanding officer ordered him and his unit to leave the safety of their vehicles and to lead an assault on the enemy's position, which was terrifying because there was almost zero cover, no terrain to take advantage of, no buildings behind which to advance, except for one wall 50 yards away next to the enemy position. But to get there meant an assault directly into the line of fire. Suicide, or so it seemed. Well, Dockery knew that whoever led that assault was likely to be cut down or killed, and he didn't feel like he could delegate that task to one of his subordinates, so rather than overthinking the risk, he did what needed to be done. It was a lesson, he said, that he had first learned in Kansas all those years ago. And so fully expecting to be the first casualty, he took off sprinting, machine gun rounds whizzing all around him. He said he never realized how long 50 yards could be. Miraculously, he made it, slamming into the wall at a full sprint. But he said when he began to turn, he was almost choked by the fear that he would turn and find that he was all alone, that nobody had followed him through all of that. Still, he turned, and as he did, he heard wham, 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 as teammates, one after the other, began slamming into the wall next to him. And then there they were, his whole team gathered under cover of the wall, prepared to overwhelm the enemy. Well, Dockery said at that moment he didn't know what lay ahead for them. He had no idea what they would find in the enemy compound, but he knew that they would be okay. that they would live through the day. And while he never lost his fear of being shot or killed, or worse, being responsible for one of his soldiers being shot or killed, he learned an important lesson that day. Fear is only crippling when there's no one to help. Fear is only crippling when there's no one to help. It's quite a story, I think. Among other reasons, I think it's a good story, friends, because Major Dockery's words, I think they illustrate who we are at our best. Teammates, neighbors, squad mates, friends, colleagues, who stand up and who show up in order to help. You know, Jesus says something interesting in today's gospel. He says, "Take my yoke upon you." I learned something about yokes this week. Yokes, those wooden harnesses that enable two oxen to pull together, they're force multipliers. So on its own, apparently, a single ox can pull 3,000, 4,000, some maybe even 5,000 pounds. Yoked together, a team, two oxen, can pull 13 or 14 or even 15,000 pounds, 7.5 tons. That's impressive. And worth remembering, too, when the world and social media and certain politicians and podcasters would have us see one another primarily as enemies, dangerous, inhuman, vermin, deplorable, because we don't belong to the right ethnicity, or we don't subscribe to the right politics, or we don't see eye to eye on difficult problems. You know, there was a time when disagreement was an opportunity for dialogue, even debate. Increasingly, it seems, it's an excuse for conspiracies and hatred and violence. That's demonic in the most basic sense of the word. Demon from the Greek word meaning to divide or to scatter. So as we celebrate these 250 years together, my friends, my challenge to you is to resist that scattering. Cast out the demonic. There's a lot of good out there yet if we're willing to claim it. Recently, a German soccer fan who was here for the World Cup, he said it so well, you may have read this. He said, "If you want to hate America, watch the news." He said, "If you want to love America, try taking a drive through it." Try taking a drive through it. So, this week, here's the challenge. Re-engage with the real America. Find someone to help. Make a point of really listening to somebody, maybe especially someone with whom you disagree. Pray for someone, maybe especially somebody you don't like or somebody with whom you have a conflict. And most of all, turn off the hate mongers. Reject the scatterers. Encounter real people. Reclaim your best American self. God bless you, and God bless our country.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the Father Bill's podcast. If you have any comments or questions, of course, I'd invite you to go to my website, fatherbill.org, FRBILL.org. There you can see what's going on in my social media accounts, as well as being able to send me an email with any comments or questions. In the meantime, may God bless you and have a great week. Bye-bye.